We've got a little bit of an interesting topic of the day, and we're going to talk about cover fishing for bass. We live in the North Country, and we have tremendous weeds in all of our lakes up here. A lot of times, since the invasive species got in our lake, zebra mussels, we have weeds in many of our lakes grow down to as deep as 18 to 22 foot of water. The interesting thing is, if you're in 18 foot of water and you look down in the water, you can see the tops of the weeds. That's how deep it is. Why I'm talking about this topic, I just saw recently, I'm sort of a YouTube junkie watching what other guys are saying, and I saw one of the bass pros, and he's saying that he was talking about a specific rig, and it was known as the Tokyo rig, and he said it was a real fad type thing, and he says, I don't think it's really that applicable for a wide variety of different fishing situations. He doesn't live where we fish. There's no way in the world. If he said that, he obviously has not caught that many fish on a Tokyo rig. Because this, bar none, for deep, really dense weed fishing conditions, there's few rigs like this that really can present the bait in a variety of different reasons why this bait works so well. Well, I can actually go fish in a deep weed edge with a jig, or punch through where I'm moving along in 12 to 14 foot of water, 16 foot of water, and my whole goal is to get to the bottom. And I can take a jig, a heavy bullet nose jig, or a punch rig, and vertically drop it back and forth through that cover and catch bass on it. You can, but there's very few. This is the most efficient means to do that, and there's a reason why. Because what this does, when this tungsten weight hits the water, the line is tracking in back of it, and it goes right down like a needle. Not only that, once it gets to the bottom, it's like a canopy, and what this is doing is actually positioning the bait up off the bottom. It's also a fabulous hooking bait. The interesting thing is throughout the summer months, we get this stuff that's called angel hair. A lot of times in our deep weed beds, what'll happen, you get this really fine filamentous moss, and you cannot throw a jig or a punch rig through there because you're constantly balling up. This really finite weeds is actually getting caught on the bait because of the way the eye is pinned on the through the head of the bait, that the weight of the bait is actually collecting this filamentous weeds. And no matter if you're fishing a punch bait or a jig, just guarantee you that this bait is one of the most efficient means to catch bass in dense weed beds. That being said, where else does this bait work? I've actually caught a lot of bass around emergent vegetation, when I'm talking of bulrushes, cattails, and that type of thing. Pretty dense vertical weeds, and it's still quite efficient for that. But where I think it's absolutely at its best is dense cover, dense weed fishing situations. I've seen very, very few baits or rigs that fishes through that type of cover better than a Tokyo rig. I'm absolutely bar none. When I first looked at that, I know Jeremy Smith and Al Lindner, we first look at that, which it looks like a mini bottom bouncer, and I happen to have a big bite craw tube on here. This is a 4-aught extra wide gap hook on there. But what you do is you drop it to the bottom, and I just jig it in place, and bait is actually suspended up off the bottom. A lot of times in these dense weed beds, you actually have a lot of stuff down on the bottom, so that bait lifting up off the bottom is really advantageous for the fish to find the bait. Not only that, with that tungsten weight, when you're jigging it, you can actually, a lot of times I would put 2 bullet nose sinkers with like a rattle in between here, and when you shake the bait, it actually makes more noise because you want to attract the fish to the bait. And though it's really dense cover conditions, one of the biggest things is attracting the fish to the bait so he can find it. When you look in there in these dense canopies like that, you can see what that is. There's a lot of weeds around for the fish to find it, so you actually have to make enough noise for the fish to find the bait. Not only that, but a lot of times in these situations, I'm using a relatively heavy tungsten weight, 3/4, ½ ounce, 1 ounce weight to get that bait down through the cover. But it's highly, highly, highly efficient means to catch bass out of dense, deep weed cover. No question about it, the Tokyo rig. I don't care what the one Bass Pro says. I don't think he's fished enough in those conditions, or otherwise he would not say that. The next bait I'm going to go to is another bait called the punch rig. In this particular case, I have a 3/4 ounce tungsten weight, rubber stop knot, again, 4-aught extreme wide gap hook. This happens to be a VMC red line hook, and then a fighting frog, a big profile lure. Where these type of baits or punch bait fishing, I use this. You can use this shallow, I can use it mid-range and deep. But where I really like this particular is in like bulrushes, dense lily pads where you're flipping along and we're only fishing anywhere between 4 to about 8 foot of water. And what I'm doing is dropping it to the bottom, shaking it in place, reeling it up, make the next flip. In and out, really quickly. It's a highly efficient means to catch bass out of dense cover conditions. We've shot a lot of different television shows over the course of the year with this. I like this better than, especially in that emergent vegetation where you're fishing with a jig. The fish are far in a way less apt to get off when you hook them with this hook than a jig. A jig, for some reason, when you're fishing around bulrushes or lily pads and the fish start to swim sideways, it seems like the weeds get caught and leverage the hook out of the fish's mouth, where that is not as apt to happen with a punch rig like this, because a lot of times this is going to actually slide away from the fish and you're going to just have them with the hook itself. But as a general rule, I think the punch bait is at its best in some shallow to mid-range, pretty emergent vegetation, lily pads, coontail, there's a lot of maiden cane. I mean, there's a lot of different weed conditions where I like throwing a punch bait like this. It's highly efficient. Now, jigs are another one, and I throw jigs a lot. The interesting thing is when I pick up a jig, as a general rule, I pick up a jig when you have more patchy habitat, or you're on the edge, you're on the outside edge where the weeds actually stop and it actually cleans up. Or if I'm in shallower fishing situations where I have like bushes, isolated bushes where I can take it, flip the bait out, and literally fish the bait for a little distance along the bottom. I'm not generally flipping it out and just shaking it in place. Not to say that wouldn't work, because you can do that with this jig. But the fact of the matter, where it's absolutely at its best is patchy conditions where the weeds grow up and you have like pretty clean pockets and holes and edges where you can take the bait and literally fish the bait for a little distance to trigger the fish into biting it. When you look at baits, every one of these lures, and it's a confidence thing, because it's just based on experience where you fish individual soft plastic presentations, whether it be a jig, a Tokyo rig or a punch rig. It's more of a confidence thing, and that's the way I look at these baits and actually how I apply it, because whenever I go out on the water and I'm bass fishing in heavy cover situations, I have all three of these on the deck. But when I select and why I pick up each rod is the real key. Where you're fishing a jig at the right place. Where am I fishing the Tokyo rig? Where am I fishing a punch bait is a completely different story. And it's more based on confidence and success on the water, I guess, you know what I mean? And they're highly efficient. They're fabulous bass catchers throughout the course of the season. Almost any hardcore bass angler has a lot of these on the deck, except for the Tokyo rig. A lot of people are not sold on the Tokyo rig. I think that's definitely a tactical error, because it's a highly efficient bait, not only for getting through the cover, but hooking the fish and ultimately landing them as well. With that free swinging hook, you don't have the tendency to lose the fish as much. But I guess that's where I'm at with cover fishing for bass.